I'm your storyteller, and tonight I'll take you somewhere most never dare to go. Beyond the bars, past the concrete walls, into the hearts of those who've lived the hardest stories of all. So, close your eyes, relax, and let me guide you through the true prison stories. First story, Death Row, the light that wouldn't hum. He walked that corridor in soft shoes that didn't dare echo, a chaplain whose job was to be the last quiet voice before the door at the end. Final weeks are made of little mercies, a prayer that lands, a letter answered, a tray set down with care. The fluorescent lights along Death Row sang their thin, steady hum that made the air feel held together. All but one. One bulb over the center stretch had gone silent. No buzz, no tremble. Beneath it, the air felt colder, as if the hallway exhaled there and never breathed back in. He noticed it on a Monday, when the ritual meal for Cell 4 went untouched. Food had a way of telling truths here. Even when appetites went, people broke the bread out of respect. Under the quiet bulb, plates stalled. Coffee cooled in perfect circles. He lifted his face toward the lens of that light and felt nothing on his skin. No slight burn, no hum's vibration in his molars. Just a chill that gathered at the base of the throat. He asked maintenance. They checked the ballast, checked the line, checked their notes. Within tolerance, they said, shrugging at the silence like it was a quirk. He didn't argue. He walked. He offered words that soothed more than they promised. He kept noticing that under every other lamp the hallway carried a thin whisper of life, while under this one, the world went flat, like a page pressed in a book. The first spike came when a switch test ran. The block lights flicked off, then on, one by one, a ripple down the length like a slow breath. At the silent bulb, the glass didn't glow. Instead, a dark shape filled it, as if the tube held ink, the shadow of a filament fattened and still. He stood beneath it, alone in the breath between clicks, and felt a pulse in the air around his ribs. Not fear exactly, pity, like a hand wanting to rest somewhere it couldn't. The men started to talk about a name that didn't belong to them. Each one, on different nights, in different tones, asked if he'd heard someone whisper a last name in the vent. Not their last name. The same, wrong name for all of them. He didn't repeat it. He learned it anyway. It traveled with him, a pebble in the pocket. He watched the rituals fray. On the day of a scheduled walk, one refused his shoes. On a day for a last call, another stayed seated, listening to the quiet lamp. The chaplain adapted, because that was what the job required. He brought water and placed it beneath the bulb, and watched the surface make a tiny concave shape, as if the air pushed down. He thought of the patterns that kept a place like this from falling apart. Keys, counts, hums, names said and signed. He had spent years making space for the human breath inside those patterns, standing near while the machine did its work. Now, one part of the machine wouldn't sing, and the human sounds thinned under it, as if the silence absorbed them. On a Thursday, he chose to stand in the cold pool and listen. He let the quiet lamp take the heat out of his face, until his cheeks felt dipped in winter light. He spoke low, not a prayer this time, but a line meant for anything that could hear. "If you're keeping watch," he said, "keep it kindly." The air pulsed once, a soft pressure on the sternum, and released. He stayed until the feeling went. He walked on. That night, the man in cell 2 asked for the chaplain to sit. He didn't want verses. He wanted the question that rides the last weeks. What do you say to a voice that isn't yours? The chaplain didn't answer with certainty. He said what he knew. You keep your breath. You let the voice be heard without giving it your name. You step out from under the light when you need warmth. The executions paused, as they do, then resumed, as they do. Paper moved, doors swung. The corridor kept time. Under the quiet bulb, last meals stayed untouched more often than not. He wrote this detail in his pocket notebook, not for a report, but to see if the pattern held. It did. Food and silence refused each other there. When they finally removed the bulb, he stood by. A ladder rattled. Gloves turned the glass free. The fixture sighed, a small breath like a relief. The tube, once out, looked ordinary in a hand. Maintenance logged it and left. For a moment the socket sat empty, the metal cup like an eye without a lid. Then the socket began to glow. It wasn't light. It was a dull coal color, a suggestion that something continued to burn without heat. He felt a cool draft rise from it, and the corridor seemed to tilt toward that point, as if drawn. In that soft glow, the wrong last name exhaled itself. Not spoken, but shaped at the edge of hearing, the way steam shapes your breath on cold air. He didn't run. He bowed his head in the quiet the way he would in a chapel. He said nothing for a long time. When he finally spoke, he offered the smallest address he owned. "Friend," he said. The glow thinned. The air lightened. The hum marched on from the other fixtures, lane by lane, and death row returned to its measured sound. The socket kept its faint ember for one more night, then cooled to nothing anyone could point to. The notebook held one short line. The light that wouldn't hum kept count in a different way. Second story. Transport bus. The passenger in the mirror. Pre-dawn rain braided the highway into two thin rivers, and the bus rode the seam between them, heavy and calm. He liked this hour. The world felt emptied out, like a room after a prayer. 5 inmates sat chained and belted, spread for balance. 2 left, 2 right, 1 in the rear corner. He knew their count the way he knew mile markers, without looking long. Ritual kept the road from turning strange. He tapped the steering wheel at every 5th reflector. He checked the convex mirror above the aisle at Bridges when the metal hum changed pitch. He breathed with the wipers. He murmured the number under his breath, not the names, never the names, just 5, steady, like a thread he could hold with 2 fingers. Rain made a church of the bus, soft and enclosed. The cabin light over the driver's shoulder clicked on and off with a temper he knew, a switch that liked to remind you who was in charge. He let it. He stayed with the line painted in light and water. When it happened, it didn't happen all at once. In the convex mirror, 5 faces sat where 5 bodies sat. Then a 6th appeared a row behind the last man, tilted slightly toward the window, as if the glass had something to say. No seat under it, no weight where weight should be. Just the faint oval of a head and the small suggestion of eyes. He didn't break. He let one breath pass, and in that breath, he said the number again. 5. He counted belts by glance, left shoulder, right shoulder, setter strap, cinched and still. He knew every buckle's color, every worn patch on the vinyl. They were all occupied exactly as they should be. The mirror held the 6th. It wasn't a face, not exactly. It was the idea of one, caught in curved glass, like a reflection that belonged to a seat that wasn't there anymore. He checked the aisle straight, not the bending world of the mirror. Empty space between the rows. He refused the urge to turn his head too far. The ritual said, eyes to road, count, breath, mirror, count, breath. He touched the brakes 1 feather's width to test the bus's voice. Chains clattered behind him, a chorus of little metal apologies. From somewhere under that sound, close to the driver's partition, a whisper slid out, soft enough to be his own thought spoken back to him. Window latch. He didn't answer. He checked the left mirror for the next mile marker, a green sign ghosted by rain, and he aligned the bus with its ghost. He knew the windows. He'd done the pre-trip tug. He knew the latch feel, the give and the click. He knew he hadn't missed one. Fog bloomed on the inside, a pale film at the corners of the glass. And then, the startling press of a handprint appeared on the outside. Palm and 5 fingers flared wide, dragging as the bus cut air. Outside at 60. No ladder, no ledge, just rain and a touch from the wrong side. The nearest 6th leaned a little toward him, the curve exaggerating the tilt. He could have pulled over, called it in, reset the world with procedure. Instead, he made a choice the way you make a quiet vow. He kept the speed. He set his jaw. He looked into the convex glass and met the not face, as if it were a passenger who needed a steady driver. Nothing more. The next mile laid itself under the tires like a laid-out sheet. He spoke once into the cabin, not for the bodies in back, but for whatever knew how to ride reflections. Stay seated. He kept the tone that tells people what to do without telling them who they are. The chains settled. Rain hammered, then softened. The handprint smeared itself away into a long wet arc that traced the shape of the bus's wake. He watched the mirror, and when the 6th flickered, he didn't blink. It steadied, as if the attention pinned it in place. He counted again. 5. He let the 6th exist, without adding it to the number. At a way station, the overhead canopy rattled. He rolled through the bypass lane, cleared by a green arrow, and felt the bus lighten, as if something had decided to unclench. The cabin light clicked on and hummed, its filaments singing like a thin wire. In the mirror, the Sixth turned its head toward the rear, toward the man in the last seat, a man who'd kept his eyes closed the whole ride. The whisper came again, pressed through the metal like breath through a reed. Window latch. He knew what it asked. He pictured the bar lifting, the panel sliding, air folding into the cabin like a river finding a gap in a dam. He didn't touch it. He said, "Belts check," and the rear guard, roused by habit, walked the aisle slow, brushing each strap with 2 fingers. 5 nods from 5 bodies. The guard didn't look at the empty slice of air where the Sixth sat in the mirror. When they reached the turnoff for the institution, the sky thinned. The mirror's curve flattened the world into a coin. The Sixth's edges softened, like breath on glass, then flattened further, until the coin held only 5, their outlines ordinary as sleep. He exhaled, a measured thing, and let the bus roll to the sally port. In the lot, while the gate ground open, he glanced at the dash cam's red diode, steady as a pulse. Later, the video would show a seat belt in the middle row latch itself, then unlatch, then latch again with no hand near it. He didn't need the video. He knew the feel of the bus when a weight decides to sit with you and then decides to leave. He shut the engine down, feeling the vibration unwind out of the frame. He whispered his number, not his name, and climbed down into the wet. 5 stepped off. The mirror over the gate held only rain. Third story, abandoned wing, the count that wouldn't balance. They sent a maintenance crew into a condemned block on a heat-heavy afternoon when the lights felt more like weight than brightness. The order was simple: check doors, tag hazards, and do a head count of bodies in the area for safety. Helmets and vests, no names, just tags. The wing had been sealed for years after a plumbing failure and a string of incidents that never lined up on paper. Dust lay like ash on the rails. Paint blistered in long blisters that looked like sleep. They keyed the chain and rolled the gate with a grinding scrape that echoed farther than the space should allow. 6 hard hats, 6 little lights bobbing. The air had a dull buzz that wasn't electricity, more like the memory of it, like a wire humming to itself after the current is gone. They stepped in. The first odd thing wasn't a sound. It was tidy. Outside empty cells, shoes sat in neat pairs, toes square to the door, as if their owners were already inside and didn't need them anymore. The dust around them was clean, 2 bright footprints like a snapshot. One of the crew bent to nudge a boot and paused. The toe print was fresh enough to show tread. He lifted his foot to compare and didn't like the match. "Tag and move," the foreman said. keeping the voice low the way people do without deciding to. They chalked doors and marked loose grates. A helmet brushed a web that existed only in the cold on his cheek. Halfway down, a roll call cracked the air. Not shouted, announced, crisp, the way it's done when heads must be counted. The crew froze. The numbers came out in a steady rhythm, and at the last digit, there was a beat too long and a quiet correction, like someone adjusting an entry. The foreman called out, "Maintenance 6," because that's the rule. Answer the call with your number, not your name. The roll call did not answer back. The silence had a shape like a held breath. They decided to speed the pace. Each door got a chalk hash, a scuff on the threshold to show progress. One worker kept tally on a wall near the entrance. Every fifth mark crossed, neat and square. By the time they reached the middle, the count in his head and the marks on the wall drifted apart. They radioed the front. The radio hissed and fed back a fraction of their own words, enough to suggest a mirror, not an ear. At a corner where the wing jogged, dust had settled in a soft drift. Across it, prints crossed at an angle no living person could have made without stepping through the steel. Heel, toe, heel. The pattern stopped neatly at the line where paint met concrete, as if the floor decided to become something else for a few inches and then changed its mind. A helmet light swung toward the last cell door, where the final inspection tag from years ago still hung limp. The tag had been turned over. On the blank side, a thumbprint, old and dry. They regrouped and did what crews do when a place feels wrong. They checked each other. 6 helmets, 6 badges, 6 small beams. The foreman counted them twice, then put a hand on the tallyman's shoulder. "Call it," he said. The tallyman turned to the wall where he'd been making marks. The last hash had appeared while they stood in the corner. He hadn't made it. It leaned left, unlike his, and the chalk dust under it looked damp. "Final door," someone said, because there's always a final door, even in a condemned wing. It was the one near the old laundry chute, painted over twice, hinges frozen with time. When they put a hand to it, the metal felt elastic, the way a drumhead feels just before the strike. The smell came first, river mud and wet linen, a scent no one could name without admitting it made them think of things underwater. The door didn't open all the way. It swung a hand's width and stopped as if a body lay against it from the inside. On a cot past the gap, something creaked one long time and settled, the sound of a weight taking its place. They backed off, because this wasn't their mandate. They tagged the frame, wrote, "Do not enter," and turned to make the exit pass. The path back stretched longer than the path in. The shoes they'd seen at the start had changed formation by an inch. The prints in the dust had softened, like breath had warmed them. At the gate, the foreman called, "Count." Voices answered, 1, 2, 3, 4. A pause. 5. They waited for 6, and the waiting went long enough to make the air curve. Then the last voice came from farther inside the wing, not from the gate. 6. Hearts went hard and shallow. The foreman grabbed for the chain. They rolled the gate, signed out on the clipboard by the door, the ritual that resets a place back to normal. 5 signatures, 5 helmets on the bench. The 6th hard hat was still on the foreman's head. They turned, and the car door behind them lay flat and empty. No light moved, no shoe scuffed. The foreman set the helmet down for the count. The bench held 6 now, tidy in a row. 1 had a scuff new enough to shine. They filed the report. Hazards noted, access restricted, staff cleared. The number of personnel had a strike-through and a corrected figure next to it. When they returned 2 days later with locks and plates, the tally at the wall had grown by 1 during the hour they stood outside arguing over keys. No one touched the chalk. They installed the plates anyway, and left a spare helmet on a hook by the door, because the wing would not balance without it. Story 4. Solitary Shoe, the Hour Without Air. He started each night by counting hums. In SHU, you don't have windows. You have rhythms. The vent above his bunk carried a thin, steady drone that kept the mind from folding inward. He called it the metronome. It was his clock, his company, his proof that the building still breathed. Every 20 hums, he took a sip of water. Every 40, he stood and did a slow stretch, hands to the ceiling, fingertips counting the paint blisters he knew by touch. The slot in the door framed a piece of hallway that never moved. He learned to live inside the hum. The night it stopped, it didn't die with a pop. It drifted off, like someone turned a dial and walked away. The air didn't go silent. It went thick, the way a room feels just before rain. He sat up and felt the heaviness settle on his shoulders. He waited for the unit keys, the sweep, the distant roll of a cart. Nothing. Just the muffled thud of his own pulse. He pressed his ear to the vent and heard absence, which has its own weight when you get used to a pattern. He tapped his knuckle on the concrete, a gentle 2, 3, to the cell he knew held a body like his. 2, 3. Pause. 2, 3. The code was simple. The answer was simpler. Tonight, no reply. His ones in the world, he counted 100 heartbeats, then tapped again. 2, 3. Nothing. With the hum gone, the breath count took over. 4 in, 4 out. He felt the edges of panic when the 4th exhale didn't empty right, as if the room kept a little of his air for itself. He swallowed and reset. 4 in, 4 out. He told himself stories about damp wool and old ducts, about how machines nap and wake. The stories didn't land. The cell pressed back, as if the walls were thinking. He tried to call for the officer, but his own voice felt too loud for the space. He whispered instead, a quiet "Hey!" tasting dust and cold paint. The slot in the door whispered back with the softest exhale, a sound made by no lungs, just air moving wrong. He froze. The slot was shut. He hadn't heard it open. He hadn't heard it close. He lifted his hand and held it near the seam. Cold leaked out like a thin thread, and the hair along his wrist stirred. He needed the hum. He needed the grid. His fingers found the scratches he'd made on the wall, a tiny calendar in chalk and nail, just a way to stretch the line of days. He counted them. He knew the number. He could see the sequence in his head, the way the fifth mark always leaned a little. Tonight, the count came up short by 1. He pressed his thumb to the chalk. It smeared. He made the missing mark, slow, the way you touch a sleeping animal. Behind him, something exhaled near his ear, warm and damp, and vanished when he turned. In SHU, the mind offers pictures because there's nothing else to look at. He saw the vent like a throat that had closed. He pictured the slot breathing in when he breathed out. He told himself to stay with the count. 4 in, 4 out. He tapped the wall again. 2, 3. It wasn't a call this time. It was a heartbeat he could hear outside his body, mapped in the concrete. The slot hissed. Not a full open, just enough for the thin metal tongue to show and hide. He slid to the floor, back to the cot, and pressed his heels into the frame to feel something that wasn't air. In the dark, the room changed shape by inches. The ceiling lowered, the corners crowded in, and the vent returned a sound that wasn't a hum. It was offbeat, a hesitant pulse, like a machine trying to remember its job. The rhythm didn't match his breath, so he tried to match it, and that made his chest hitch. He bargained, because that's what you do when the rules fail. He promised that if the hum came back, he'd stop tapping. He promised he'd keep his eyes on the floor line and his mouth shut at count time. He promised whatever wanted air could have a little of his if it would just give the rhythm back. The vent answered with a stagger, then settled into a new pattern. 2 quick, 1 long, a cadence he'd never heard on this tier. It didn't soothe him. It set his teeth on edge. He stood and touched the metal, and it was colder than metal should be. He spent the rest of the night pressed to the door seam, not to watch, but to feel the thin leak of that colder air, proof that something beyond the cell still moved. When the trap slid in the morning, he saw his chalk again. His marks were tidy, neat, as if someone had taken their time while he slept. He hadn't slept, and the mark he'd made in the night wasn't there. In its place, a shallow groove, fingertip wide, cut into the paint 4 inches lower than his row. He put his hand against the wall and found that groove fit his index finger, as if he'd made it years ago, standing shorter, waiting for the slot to click. On yard release, the world went too big, the sky too much. He walked to the far fence and turned to face the building. He traced his cell in his mind, counting windows that weren't windows. A detail was wrong. The scuffs near his door seam were mirrored. The pattern of wear sat on the opposite side. His fingertips, the small oval pad of touch he knew like his own signature, had scuffed a different face. He stared until his breath synced with the offbeat rhythm the vent had taken for itself. Then, without wanting to, he breathed a quiet thank you to the air and kept it moving. Story 5. Modern Max Security, the door that learned names. It starts with keys on a ring that never warm, no matter how long they sit in your palm. He worked nights in a modern Max unit, concrete halls, analog locks because the warden liked redundancies, and a quiet that soaked the corridor like thick wool. His route was simple, and the routine kept the nerves from fraying. Badge scan, count the sleeping bodies, check the bolts, move on. The whole place ran on ritual. He ran on it too. The first odd sound came small, like a throat clearing behind a metal door. Not a bang, not a call, just a soft throat click when he passed cell 19. He stopped, turned, listened through the little square of reinforced glass. The inmate inside was rolled to the wall, blanket up. Slow breath making a gentle rise and fall. Good. He moved on. 2 nights later, cell 19 again, the same click, timed to his steps. He noted it in his head and said nothing. There's always a sound. Air, metal, nerves. Keep the line. On the 4th night, the intercom popped with a tiny burst of static as he reached the midpoint of the tier. He paused, looked up at the grid in the ceiling. A hum like a refrigerator, and then a whisper that wasn't the radio. His badge number, shaped into a syllable. The way you'd say your own name in a mirror to test if it still fits. He stood still, breath shallow, the kind of still that makes your joints ache. The panel over the door to the stairwell showed solid green, no one else on the tier. He keyed the mic and gave the practiced line. Unit C clear, continuing count. His voice sounded normal. Inside, something small curled tight against his ribs. He finished his loop and came back the long way, counting the rise and fall of sleeping bodies like waves. 19's window was dark. 21, dark. 23, a shoulder lump under a blanket. A tattooed knuckle pressed into the pillow. He listened for anything that didn't belong. The quiet pressed back, as if the walls had leaned closer to hear him think. At the far end, he turned toward the stairwell. That's when the slam came. Not a slam door, the slam. A single, absolute strike of steel on frame, somewhere behind him, so clean and complete it felt like a bar across his spine. He spun, raising the flashlight. The beam jumped and then went thin, a dying filament blinking to an amber point. He shook it. Nothing. In the dark, the keys felt slick and strangely cold, as if they'd just come out of ice water. He stood in that corridor with the dead light and the wet cold keys and listened. Long seconds. A small drip somewhere. The air thickened, and his mouth wanted to say his own name just to prove the voice still worked. He swallowed it. He walked by memory to the nook where a wall fixture always hummed a little louder. It made a gentle map in his head. Hum, pause, hum. He put his shoulder to the wall and kept the keys away from the floor so they wouldn't sing. If his radio flared, he decided he would not answer by name. He would use the flat tones they taught. Unit C, clear. While he waited, he counted his breath. 4 in, 4 out. 4 in, 4 out. the way you count doors. Then the intercom pressed itself open with a soft, airless pop. The same empty channel. And into it, from no mouth, a whisper that tried on his name. Not the number this time, his name, but bent a little, like someone practiced it in a dry throat until it almost matched, and then held the last vowel too long. He thought of the inmate in 19, and the slow rise and fall of sleep, of the inked knuckle in 23, of all the bodies pinned to their cots by rules written and unwritten. He thought, don't feed this, don't teach it. He set the keys between his teeth and used both hands to strip the flashlight battery and reseat it. The light caught for a moment, enough to paint the edges of the floor, the scuffed paint near each threshold, the thin line of dust that always lay against the baseboard. 40 feet down, a hair-thin shadow broke that line under cell 19, exactly where a door would have slivered if the latch had eased. He felt the shape of a test rise in him. He let the light die and spoke very quietly, the way you speak when you don't want to wake a house. He said a badge number that wasn't his, 1 digit off, and waited. The door gave a polite click and settled back. His heart kicked once, hard. He took the keys out of his mouth, wiped them on his sleeve though they weren't wet anymore, and moved step by careful step toward the stairwell. As he reached for the handle, the intercom exhaled one last breath of static and tried again. This time it matched his name perfectly and shaped the last consonant with a little satisfaction, as if something had finally aligned. He didn't file a report. He wrote up the count. He checked the bolts. He rode the elevator with his eyes on the seam where the doors meet. He put in for a transfer to the day rotation within a week. No notes about doors or voices, just a line about sleep and family. On his last night, the tier was quiet. He walked past 19, and the line of dust lay unbroken. The light over the stairwell hummed steady. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt watched by something patient, something that had learned to say his name and was willing to wait for him to say it back. He didn't. And when he left, the unit log recorded nothing unusual, except an entry on the following week from a different officer, a single line about an intercom test with no audio, and a handwritten note in the margin. Unit kept asking for him.
That's it for tonight. Consider leaving a like and subscribing. See you in the next quiet hour.